This is Global Tel Link. You have a prepaid call from
Silas Johnson.
an inmate at the Centinela State Prison, Centinela, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
So on our previous call, you had mentioned that you had been arrested by an undercover officer, and you sold them crack. Just to give us a clear picture, before that, you had mentioned that you were into sports. How do you go from playing sports and next thing you're selling crack? How's that happen? How do you evolve and go down that path?
It actually wasn't like a full transition, if you will. Like it started out just around the neighborhood, just hanging out with the kids my age in the neighborhood and seeing them hustling and just actually getting something from one of them and trying to sell it and getting caught up.
So it was just pretty much like everybody in the neighborhood was doing it?
I think during that time, this is 93, and I had seen, everybody that had benefited from the drug trade, from the crack cocaine epidemic. And I guess looking at my dad, who was a bus driver, he drove for RTD, which later turned to MTA, for almost 30 years, and seeing him, work hard every single day and, see drug dealers that did hardly anything, in my opinion, and have all of the fancy cars and, clothes and women attracted to them. It just seemed glamorous to me, and I figured I'd try my hand.
And let me ask you, did movies like Colors or Scarface or Carlito's Way, did they have any type of influence on you to go down that path?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. While accepting self-responsibility, of course, we're all responsible for what we do. But as a kid, seeing that, you said it, Scarface, Colors, New Jack City, Nino Brown, and, you see people, glorified for being drug dealers, for committing violent acts and murder, and you see that, and you see people, the respect and the aura around these people, and growing up in an impoverished neighborhood with mostly people who are powerless, the only thing that you want is power. And for impoverished people, money is the conduit to power. Respect is the conduit to power. And so when you see those things and you see them glorified, and you see, even the straight kids, the square kids, are looking up to these images of these people, Ice-T back then, Cop Killer, and, you got white kids who never sold anything in their lives, who never had a fight in their lives, who were playing this music and embracing all of this culture. And, it definitely has an effect. It definitely, makes you aspire. It has an effect in kids aspire to want to be that, because they want to have value and they want to be important. So it definitely has an effect.
In retrospect, and with everything that's come out over the years, I think those movies and music and whatnot, they did their intended purpose. They were put out to influence us and take us down a different path. So overall, they were successful at the plan they had for us.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. I mean, you look at whether you're looking at movies, music. I mean, positivity don't sell. We live in a hypersexual, hyper-violent society, and sex sells, and violence sells, and we're an addicted nation, so drug use sells. The images of drug use sells. I mean, so these are the things that, these are the sicknesses that we have that are inherent in our culture as Americans, and so, yeah, all of those things, the images and the violence, and, it's actually, ironically, it's actually woven into the fabric of American culture. I mean, we're a violent nation. We're historically, this nation was founded on murder, and all of these movies and music and these images that we're seeing are just reinforcing who we've actually been historically this whole time.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
It's funny that you mentioned that, just because I was having a conversation with my wife and my sister while I was in LA a few weeks back, and I mentioned to my wife that when we came here, there was already established gangs here that were not brought from our countries of origin or wherever we came from. These gangs were already established many years before we got here. The only thing we did was start our own groups up to defend ourselves, and ultimately it ended up morphing into something bigger than life, and had a profound negative impact on our society now. But she was kind of shocked, that because the way it's been is they make it seem like we as Latinos, come from Central America, Mexico, South America, and we bring these gangs with us, where these gangs didn't exist when our people left their countries. But once they landed here, they had no choice but to start their own thing up, and they ended up taking those problems or these problems here in the U.S. back to their native countries.
Yeah, I think that's a falsehood. I mean, as far as people bringing the gangland culture here, I mean, before modern day, what we know conventionally as gangs. I mean, look at you look back until when my grandfather was in the South. My grandfather left the South at age 19 and joined the Navy. He left Arkansas, where the Ku Klux Klan was, which is a gang. It's a racist gang who murders different ethnicities. So, you have the mob, you have, there's gangs have always been, or posses, go back into the 1800s, you have posses, the convention of gangs aren't anything new, it's just something that these are the bad people who are doing it.
Yeah. So let's get back to selling crack. What happened? Were there any repercussions for getting arrested at that time, or was it just taking you down to the police station, calling your parents up, and your dad picking you up, and that was pretty much it?
Well, my brother and I, and a friend of mine, Frank, we were all out there, and so the cop pulls up. He asked for some weed, and my buddy Frank tells him he has weed, and I tell him, hey, I got crack too, and so he's like, let me get some of that too. And in retrospect, thinking back, what a moron and novice to the drug game I am, because a crackhead is going to come by crack. He ain't going to come by weed. He don't want weed. And so he tells us to meet him around the corner. I go over there, and they pull up, and I run away, and eventually they come to my house and get me and arrest me. My brother gets arrested for tossing a gun, and my buddy Frank goes to jail. So all three of us go to jail. And true to form, just like you said, my dad come picks us up. We don't even make it to Silmar Juvenile Hall. We get a court date, and I get put on probation. And that was pretty much the beginning of my history in the LA County Juvenile Probation Department system.
And just to paint a picture for our audience, you might hear that he was selling weed, and you might think that it wasn't a big deal, but during this time, in this era, it was a big deal, and this would either you would end up in juvenile hall, or you would end up in county jail, or possibly even prison over a nickel sack of weed, if you will. It was a different time, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, marijuana was criminalized. You know, especially if you got caught with some weed back then, I mean, you were going to jail. I think it was like less than an ounce you would get a ticket, but like an ounce or more, you're getting arrested. Yeah, it was a different time back then.
Yeah, but normally if you would have, let's say, if you would have a small quantity of weed, normally you would have something else. So if the weed didn't land you in jail, the stuff on top of there would. Either you had a knife or a hammer or possibly a gun.
Oh yeah.
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 So I think it went hand in hand.
Right. You're not just out there selling weed or selling dope in Los Angeles on the corner without having any weapon to protect your investment out there. So like you said, it goes hand in hand.
So you land on probation. You go to court. Does anything change? Does being on probation affect you, or is it just another day?
It was another day. It actually reinforced the fact that the delusion in my mind that I could do what I wanted and escape any type of consequences. I sat in jail for a couple of hours and got out, and that was it. And a couple months later in December, while my brother and I were in Panorama City, I actually committed a strong arm robbery. And this time, I didn't get picked up by my dad and go home. I spent some time in camp and in juvenile hall.
Right now, you just mentioned your dad. Do you remember was there any type of reaction from your dad? What words were any words said?
Oh, he was pissed off. He was pissed off, and I remember, a lot of yelling, and in particular, I remember the detective, asking me to admit that because I got away from the scene, and I hid the marked money, so I'd even kept the marked money after I sold them the dope. We did the transaction. I ran before they could catch me, so I had the money and put up. And my brother and I actually went to McDonald's and spent the money the next day. So the detective was asking me, hey, your dad's right here. Just admit what you did. And even though I was only 15 years old, I mean, in my mind, like, it's avoid detection. Lie, deny. So I don't care if my dad's sitting right here, and this detective is trying to get me to own up to what I had done. Like, in my mind, like, the cops aren't here to help me.
You have 60 seconds remaining. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So my thing was just to deny, and lie. And so my dad was pretty pissed off with me.
And was there any type of discipline? Were you grounded? Any physical violence? What did it?
I think I remember getting put on punishment for it, but not really physical. Not anything physical. My dad probably physically physically hit me maybe 3 times my whole life. Like, so that wasn't really, you know, my dad was a real big imposing dude, so actually physically corrected me. That wasn't necessary. All he had to do was yell a little bit and, you know, until my team